In 1933 in Holland. It was originally a football pitch, 2 training pitches and a playground. A playground, which the following year got some new activities like a steam carousel. Things got out of hand from there to the point in 1952 it actually became a fully fledged theme park. It's grown since and now consists of many roller coasters, haunted houses, fairytale forests and a collection of strange and wonderful characters. The main reason I care about this is that's where I spent New Year's Eve 2019. It was a fantastic trip and I had very much fun. While ice skating and then while recovering from falling and hurting my ankle while having a beer after ice skating, I did the standard software engineer thing and started asking more questions than I should have while I was on holiday. The question I asked myself is it possible to visit every attraction in Efteling in a single day? Or do I need to book a second one? First of all, a disclaimer, this talk is not sponsored or endorsed in any way by Efteling. I just really enjoyed myself there. A second disclaimer, I am not an engineer or a computer scientist or a mathematician, so please be kind whenever you hear descriptions of computer science type things. So, what is Efteling and what are the attractions? In Efteling, on the main website, they currently list 34 different attractions, as you can see on the screen provided. They are scattered around 180 acres of land and can be found on the standard map that you're given as you go in and also available on the app. So my question was, can I go and visit each one of these in a single day? It's quite a large area, there's quite a lot to see and do, so is it possible? Doing some initial research, the answer to the question was the Travelling Salesman Problem, which is generally defined as, given a list of cities and the distances between each pair of cities, what is the shortest possible route that visits each city exactly once and returns to the origin city? So, why is this difficult? It should be straightforward. This is where we take a brief diversion into computational complexity theory. The reason we do this is to talk about computers and what they're good at and what they're not good at. Computational complexity theory focuses on classifying computational problems according to the resource usage and relating these classes to each other. Basically, is this easy? Can it be done? And then basically being able to group these classes of problems together. A computational problem is a task solved by a computer. This isn't just like one small thing, it can be many steps, and this is our notion of computer problem, which is solvable by mechanical application of mathematical steps, such as an algorithm. So, as I said, this is basically to figure out what practically computers can do. Now, heads up, I'm already out of my depth here. We're branching into computer science, and, I studied electricity. So, we're going to skip a bunch of it and get to the highlight, which is basically the different classes of problems. Our first class is P, problems, and these are problems that can be solved in polynomial time, or basically in a reasonable amount of time. So these are problems that can be solved and verified in this time, so things like string matching, determinant prime number, Laplace transforms, those sorts of things. Our next class are NP problems, which are non-deterministic in polynomial time. So these are problems that can't easily be solved in the time allotted. Basically what these means is it's very hard to solve, as in there's generally the amount of work that will be required is too much, for lack of a better term. But actually verifying it, if I give you the solution, verifying it is actually very, very straightforward. So an example of that is filling in a Sudoku, basically iterating through every single possible combination that could potentially be, and then produce an output. Doing things like job sequencing, trying to figure out what is the optimum way to sequence a number of tasks so that they fit into the smallest amount of time, longest common subsequences. So basically trying to find the maximum number of characters that can match in a string. The third one, which is the one that we're interested in, is NP-hard, which is non-deterministic polynomial acceptable problems. So these are problems that can be solved, but not in polynomial time. So they will take an extraordinary amount of time. They're as hard as NP problems, but they can be solved. And the case that we're going to look at is the Travelling Salesman Problem. Okay, back to where we were. Why is this important? Travelling salesmen don't exist anymore. Travelling salesmen don't exist, but other things do. Given the world we're in, logistics and Amazon have become more and more important. So how do I move and optimize the routes that I'm going through to use the least amount of petrol, fewest number of drivers, that sort of thing. Timetabling and scheduling, city planning, laying out circuit boards, and even DNA sequencing. All of these use some variation of the Travelling Salesman Problem. So, having explained what the Travelling Salesman Problem is, let's see if we can solve this. So, Travelling Salesman was first come up with in the 1800s, but it really became of interest to people in the 1930s. A mathematician in the 1930s called Carl Menger phrased it like this: we donate the messenger problem, blah, 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 the task to find for finitely many points whose pairwise distances are known, the shortest route connecting the points. Of course, this is solvable by finitely many trials. I'm going to stop there, you can read on if you want, but basically his point is to actually try and figure this out, we kind of have to try all of the potential possibilities to get the optimum solution. So an example of this is from the book Grok and Algorithms. This is a very, very basic map of the Bay Area, and this salesman has to visit these 5 cities and return back to base. So, as you can see on the right-hand side of this, he starts in Marin, and by taking the shortest route, which would be to San Francisco, then taking his next shortest route, which would be down to Palo Alto, and then taking the next shortest route across to Fremont, and then finally up to Berkeley, and then back to Marin. That will take 120 miles. Now, what Carl has said here, the first one should go to the starting point to the closest point and then to the point closest, in general does not yield the shortest route. And this is what we have here, so 120 miles. However, if we started in Marin, went to Berkeley, which goes against the rule of taking the shortest route, and then to San Francisco, down to Palo Alto, and then to Fremont, we managed to shave 17 miles off. And then what we can see, if we start in a different city, we actually have further distance to go. So the only way we can actually figure out the optimum number is to actually try out every single route, start in every single city, and then try to go to every different city. So, trying all the things. However, that ends up being a lot. So, that was 5 cities. Using 6 cities, we end up using this exponential, which is, so 6 mathematical symbol, bang, it basically means there's 720 possibilities. From 7, that then jumps up to 5,040. The way this works is, for 6 exclamation mark, it's 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6, which will give us 720. 720 then by 7 brings us to 5,040. Our problem in Efteling is we had 34 potential locations we wanted to visit, which gives us a very large number. What that actually looks like is each one of those routes has to be visited and then gone, and all of the following routes need to be found for all of those different locations. It gives us a huge amount of data, or a huge number of possibilities we need to check. Even if a single path being checked took a microsecond, we're talking years, if not longer, to actually try and calculate this. It has been calculated. People have done this up to a high number. This from this year, January this year, shows our current record using this sort of brute force mechanism, where we've got it up to 22 cities, and that was by using a quantum chip rather than our sort of standard Von Neumann architecture. If I read it right, the Von Neumann architecture would have taken 1,200 years of performance on a general CPU. So, we can't do it, the end. But we have to be able to do it. You know, people still need to do this. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what if good enough is good enough? So instead of seeking this perfect answer, so that we can find the absolutely optimum route, what if we can find something that is good enough, something that will give us enough information that we can make an informed decision and work on that. So there's two different ways of doing this that we're going to very briefly look at. First is using approximation algorithms. So these are efficient algorithms that find approximate solutions to optimization problems like our NP-hard Travelling Salesman Problem, but with provable guarantees on the distance that the return solution to the optimal one. The one that is in the best sort of position at the minute is the Christoffels algorithm, which is guaranteed to be no more than 50% longer than the optimum solution, which isn't ideal. It's still potentially a fair way off, but it gives us it in a reasonable time. The second set of solutions is using heuristic algorithms. So this basically uses a heuristic or a particular metric by which we can try to focus on. So in our particular case, we'll be looking at the amount of time or space between our locations. Practical solutions to using these heuristic algorithms include searches, neural networks, and route finding, which is pretty much exactly our use case. So the particular one we're going to look at is a genetic algorithm. So genetic algorithms are based on Darwinian evolution. So basically what we do is we take our data, which will be our genes, combine them together, figure out which is the best fit, take these better fits and just keep evolving through many generations until we get to a solution that we're potentially happy with. And we'll go through this because it's interesting. So our first thing that we're going to do it's 5 steps. First thing we're going to do is populate the gene pool with our attractions. So that top line is basically, it's our list of 34 attractions. Those are the names. And what we're going to do, what you can see here is what I've done is I've created 3 different genes. Each gene contains all of the original list of attractions, but in a random order. And that gene pool, we basically create as many genes as we want to actually try and build our pool. And that's basically what we're going to be combining stuff out of. In general, the more the better, because we'll be getting more and more data, but there's a downside to that, and we'll get to that. So we have our gene pool, we have all of these potentials that we're going to see which is the best fit. The next step then is to calculate the fitness of the gene, and this is where our heuristic comes in. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to look at the length of the gene. So basically, in our particular case, whenever I've been gathering data between 2 locations, I have taken the distance or time between point A and point B. So we have our list of 34 locations. We basically just go and add the distance between each. So distance between 1 and 2, distance between 1 and 3, keep adding those up until we get to the end. We then just make that a number between 0 and 1 for the purposes of comparisons. So, got our gene pool, each gene has a fitness. Next step, and this is where our actual sort of the genetics and evolution comes in. What we're going to do is we're going to mutate the gene by randomly selecting from the parents. So we take 2 genes, and we're going to combine those together by taking different values from each of them. So you can see sort of here, top 2 genes on the right-hand side are the 2 parent genes. And in the third line is the child gene. So we always start at entrance, because Travelling Salesman, you start and end at the same point. So we're taking the first element from the parent A, taking the second from parent B, third from parent B, and so on and so forth. There's no prescription for this, it should be completely random. And then basically we now have 3 genes, 2 parents, and a new child. And then what we do is we calculate the fitness and remove the weakest gene. So take a look at the child and check its fitness. If its fitness is better than parent, I'll start that. If its fitness isn't as good as parent A or parent B, that the child is too weak, we just throw it away. If the child is better than parent A or parent B, we keep that. It's stronger, and then we throw away the weaker parent. And what we've done now is we've now got technically a stronger gene pool. Again, in our particular case here, what fitness means is it's the shortest distance, because that is the heuristic that we're working on. And then finally, the fifth step is go back to 3. Just keep repeating that until you're happy that you've gone through enough generations that you think you've now got an acceptable answer. So that is our algorithm for how we are actually going to figure out our fitness and try and get this shortest distance. Next step then was to go fetch the data. This was a manual process where basically I ended up using a paper map and then the Android simulator with the app, and basically transporting myself in cyberspace back to Efteling to basically measure different points between activities, and then just recording those in a spreadsheet. All you need to know from the spreadsheet is columns are locations and rows are locations as well. So it's basically between here and here, this is the distance. What we need to remember here is if you look at the app on the right-hand side of the screen, there is no actual physical distance. What it is time, which is actually more or less what we want. It's basically how long will it take us to walk to that location. And that gives us a nice standardized way of doing it. The other reason it's good, which we'll see later, is it gives us the time it takes to walk via their most efficient route, which they can provide to us, and that's fine. These things are not going as the crow flies. There's no straight lines. So we have our algorithm, we have our data, we now need our code. I could definitely have done this, however, a good composer does not imitate his steals. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I happen to find one. My preferred version of this is Tom Lehrer's Plagiarize, and particularly the end of only be sure to call it research. So there was a very good implementation of this from Towards Data Science, I think that is. And where basically they basically explain this genetic algorithm and they give some sample code. I'm not going to go into the code because the blog post is there, and honestly they'll explain it better than I can. So we load in our data. So as you can see, loaded in the attractions and basically into a dictionary in Python. So our key is our place name, and then the other keys, its values is another object with keys of the time it takes to walk to that next one. So looking at this one from, Anton Picke playing to Baron 1898 would be 9 minutes. So we've got that. Next thing we do is we load it into our genetic algorithm. So they've created a class called genetic algo that passes in the parameters, and then the converge basically completes that process of 1 to 5 that I was talking about earlier. What's interesting in this is, so hash map obviously is, we pass in the distance dictionary, which is what we saw on the previous slide. We're starting at the entrance. What's next is the mutation probability and the crossover probability. This is basically how it will be determining how many things to try and pull out of each gene whenever it's creating the child gene. Population size is basically the number of genes in the gene pool that it wants to create. The number of steps is basically how many times it will basically randomize through it. And then the number of iterations is the amount of testing. So, data, algorithm, data, code, results is the next thing. So, what you can see in front of you is the output from 5 consecutive runs of the algorithm. And what's interesting is the first one is the last line above the out is the amount of time that is taken. So a couple of things to note. If you can see at the top of that, it starts off with a very large number, and it generally will reduce itself down. So as it's been going through and mutating genes, it has basically been removing the weaker genes, or the ones that take longer time, keeping the stronger ones, and then basically trying to refine to get the perfect gene, so to speak. Now, the first one started with 193 minutes and got down to 72. The second iteration started at 196 and got down to 87. And if you look below the out, so below that is the recommended order to visit the attractions. Across all 5 of these, they're all different. And this is the important thing about the algorithm that we're using versus the brute force algorithm. What we have here is an approximation. It's not going to be perfect, but it gives us enough information that we can potentially start making some decisions. What we could potentially do, given that each run of this took maybe 2 or 3 seconds, is we could run this 2,000 times and then feed those back in and basically help refine the gene pool again. So taking a finer and finer and finer pool. But even if we consistently started to get a similar number, we've still no guarantee that this is the correct answer. So, as we can see, the best answer that we found was 72 minutes, and this is the recommended path that we should take. This is why I made the point about time. So they know that to get from our first point down at the bottom left, House of the 5 Seasons, or sorry, House of 5 Leaves, across to Fabula, will take this amount of time. We can just mark it as the crow flies rather than trying to guess which of the paths and byways it's going to go. So it looks pretty good. Is it the way I would have taken it? I don't know, maybe, but it definitely gives us a good result. So, getting back to our question. The question, is it possible to visit every attraction in a single day, or should I book a second day? Yes, sort of. So what we've done here is we have calculated the amount of time that it takes to go and visit every single attraction. What we haven't taken account for is the amount of time that an attraction actually takes. So for example, Carnival Festival might take 5 minutes. The Old Timer track might take 10 minutes to go round. The other thing we haven't taken account of are the potential queues and waiting times and things like that. So whenever you combine all of those, you're still just about getting under a day, but it depends. What's interesting is we can't take account of this. Well, we can take account of the amount of time that the ride takes in our genetic algorithm. That part's fine. But we can't necessarily take, without making the problem complex again, we can't actually take account of the queue time, which they do publish. You can see under the bar in 1898 there, the waiting time is over 15 minutes, because it depends on what time you start. Those times will be changing throughout the day. So it gives us a good answer, and one that I'd be happy with. I can do it in one day, but realistically I'm going to go back for a second day anyway. So, our genetic algorithm has given us an answer that we quite liked. There are other techniques. We could use dynamic programming, which is different to dynamic web programming, as I found out, but it made it very hard to Google. But it is fairly complicated. It is a fairly complicated process. Pairwise exchange and two-opt, optimized Markov chains, and colony optimization, all of these are providing better and better answers, getting you closer to the ideal of the brute force scenario, but we're still a ways off it. So we've got a good approximation, but finally just one thing to kind of realize. This is from a psychology report. Basically it says the Travelling Salesman Problem. Humans can basically find these patterns fairly easily. With 10 to 20 nodes, we are only 1% less efficient and can do it in seconds just by looking at it, and we're only 11% less efficient with graphs with 120 nodes. So humans are much better at this sort of problem than computers are, and this gets back to our what can computers do and computer complexity thing. But before we get too proud of ourselves, pigeons can do this as well. It is not just us with our highly evolved brains, it is also pigeons and other small animals. So, in conclusion, the thing that I've taken away from this is getting the answer correct isn't always the right thing to do. But also being right, doing the right thing isn't always correct. For my purposes I'm booking a day's holiday or 2 days holiday, I am quite happy with this approximation. It's not going to, what it's going to cost me. The cost-benefit analysis is doing it in a significantly shorter time is fine. If I had a rocket that I was trying to launch that needed to bypass various stars, comets, and various other things, but I only had one shot or the entire universe exploded, I may want to get it better, much better, the optimal answer. Conclusions, computers are dumb, people and animals are smart, and Efteling is fun. Thank you.